Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone, and welcome to an Out of the Green edition of the Rider Rumblings video podcast. We're here to discuss the Rough Riders' reported change at offensive coordinator. Stephen McAdoo looks like he won't be returning. It appears, according to a report by TSN's David Naylor on Thursday, that Jason Maas will be the Rough Riders' new offensive coordinator. With me is the great Austin Davis, former NFL quarterback, St. Louis Rams.
That's a different one.
Sorry.
If you Google me, you have to put Regina. That's the only way to get me. Hey, Rob.
But you're still amazing.
Thank you.
So we just throw this.
Well, I'm no Murray McCormick.
No, there's youth in the room for once, and I feel somewhat aged now, being by far the elder statesman in here.
Yeah. Well, let's get to it. So as you said, Stephen McAdoo, it appears, does not have a job, and Jason Maas does. I think that's what we know.
At least in Saskatchewan. We don't really know
right.
where Stephen McAdoo is heading. There was talk that he was being in line to be interviewed for the Ottawa Redblacks head coaching job. With so many coaching staffs in flux, perhaps he's found something else and maybe wasn't intending to return anyway. We don't really know what has led to the departure of Stephen McAdoo, whether that was of his own volition or whether that was at the behest of the Rough Riders. Yeah. Regardless, the clear reality, Dave Naylor never misses anything, is that Jason Maas is in, Stephen McAdoo will no longer be the Riders' offensive coordinator. And I think there's divided opinions on both of them. Yeah. There are people in the keep McAdoo camp, and there's people in the he should have been gone last year camp. Yeah. If you look at the Jason Maas, there are people who are excited about it because he is a premier offensive mind. And there are also people who are wary of it because of his, shall we say, combustibility.
Yeah, as we saw multiple times on the sidelines during the Eskimo season, and not a great season for the Edmonton Eskimos.
No, but I'm not sure that should even be a factor because to me it's a different discussion, Austin. Jason Maas became a CFL head coach because he was so highly regarded as an offensive coordinator and as an assistant coach. Right. And he was a fiery player. People knew that he had that temperament, but it was never an issue when he was an offensive coordinator before in the league. And he's, by every account, very good at doing that. He's not going to be on the sidelines, I wouldn't think. He's not going to be screaming at the officials. He's going to be up in the booth. Yeah. So maybe a pen will fly periodically in the press box, not on camera unless TSN times it really well. So
not the same spotlight.
I think it's a different discussion with Jason Maas. If you're looking at Stephen McAdoo leaving, whether you agree or disagree, I think if you're a follower of the Rough Riders or an employee of the Rough Riders, I think you have to be pretty happy that it's Jason Maas coming here.
I think I've got a sense for how you feel, and you wrote in your column that ran Wednesday, that Jason Maas would be a good fit here. So let me ask you point blank, what do you think of Jason Maas being the offensive coordinator for the Saskatchewan Riders?
I think it's of who they could get. It's one thing to say, okay, Stephen McAdoo isn't here, but you've got to get somebody who's credible. Jason Maas is about as credible as you're going to get as an offensive mind. So if you've got to make that change for whatever reason, I'm not sure how they could do much better. Yeah, that's to me that's a coup for the Saskatchewan Rough Riders to get Jason Maas. It's going to be a transition now because one thing we do know. One of the reasons that I defended Stephen McAdoo and encouraged the Rough Riders to bring him back, showing how much influence I really have, is that what we do know is that Cody Fajardo can prosper in the Stephen McAdoo system. Right. Say what you want about everything else, but Stephen McAdoo was the offensive coordinator of a team that signed Cody Fajardo in February. Nobody really knew who he was, and he blossoms into this phenomenon.
But there seems
CFL
to be
All-Star quarterback and most ascending player in the West. Stephen McAdoo has to be part of the credit for that.
But there seemed to be a trust there between Fajardo and McAdoo that didn't exist when Brandon Bridge was behind center. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and maybe it's just a matter of having a better quarterback too. They were able to let they did seem to have some trust in Brandon Bridge in 2017. They let him play play his game. In
Right.
2018, it seems like there were restrictions placed upon what he was allowed to do, or perhaps there were just restrictions on what he could do.
Yeah.
But now you're facing a situation where, okay, you've got Cody Fajardo, you've got this great young quarterback, and year two, he's got to adjust to a new system.
Okay.
And is that going to be a factor? I don't think it's going to be huge, because you look what a quick study Cody Fajardo proved to be, picking up the Rough Rider system here and so quickly establishing himself as a star. So I don't think it's going to be a major impediment, but it still disrupts the continuity, and you never know for sure. I remember it seemed for the longest time when Darian Durant was a quarterback here that there was talk about, and he lamented at times, the revolving door at offensive coordinator. Right. And maybe that's the nature of coaching in the Canadian Football League as well. But
it's the nature of the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty transient league. But you look at 2008, the first year that Darian was the quarterback, the starting quarterback for any duration. Paul LaPolice was the offensive coordinator for 2 years. Then came Doug Barry for a year and a half. Right. Then Ken Miller for half a year.
Right.
Then Bob Dice for a year. Then George Cortez for 2 years. Then Jacques Chapdelaine for a year. And then Stephen McAdoo for a year.
Right.
And the lack of continuity didn't prevent Darian from becoming a star, an icon here. But I still think having to kind of pick up a new system every year or two wasn't the greatest situation. So if there is a concern about what's happened here, it's that, okay, you know what Cody Fajardo can do within this structure, and I think that went very well by every measure.
Yeah, of course.
Can they build upon that next year?
What is going to be the most noticeable difference in that offense next year? What can Rider Nation expect from a Jason Maas offense? What are the hallmarks of a Jason Maas offense?
I think they're going to throw the ball a lot. And they threw the ball quite well this year. Cody Fajardo led the league in passing yardage with 4,302, 18 touchdown passes in 16 starts.
And he can run.
Jason Maas likes to throw the football. One of the raps against him in Edmonton sometimes as the offensive coordinator, that he was a little quick to not emphasize the running game. And CJ Gable still gained 1,000 plus yards this past year, but there were times where it seemed like they would eschew the run.
Yeah.
And I wonder, and somewhat intrigued by now, what kind of passing yardage Cody Fajardo might put up. And you don't want to take the running out of his game, but you also have to look at the preservation and longevity of your quarterback. And if he's going to keep rushing for 600 yards a year, and if there's going to be that expectation, how long can he last?
Yeah.
If you look at Darian's career as a Rough Riders quarterback, as adept a runner as he was, as he got into his late 20s, early 30s, he kind of picked his spots. Darian could have rushed for 800 yards a year if he'd wanted to. Look at what he did against BC in the West semifinal in 2013. But I think at some point you have to be judicious and think, okay, maybe we can ease the physical toll or reduce the physical toll on the quarterback if they throw more. Yeah. And then the discussion becomes, okay, who's he going to throw to?
Right. And it's a weird time to have this because there are still question marks on that depth chart on that side of the ball.
And as is the case everywhere. But you look at the Riders receiving core, and Kyran Moore is back. But after that, I mean, Shaq Evans, 1,300 plus yards, is a pending free agent.
Yeah.
Naaman Roosevelt is a pending free agent. They've got some... Jordan Williams-Lambert's under contract. There's a player I can see really prospering with Jason Maas as the offensive coordinator, because there's a premier talent who really wasn't used that well.
No.
And nor was Manny Arsenault.
But we've probably seen the last episode of the Manny show.
Probably have, but maybe there's some mileage if you bring Manny back and put him at slot back and let him do what he does.
Right.
Putting Manny as wide out or putting Jordan Williams-Lambert as a wideout.
Right.
He's a slot back. He's a 6'4" premier target.
Yeah.
That's where they've had their success.
But Watson looked good in that role too. He's a pretty big body with solid hands.
But he's 36 next year.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So that's where I was going next with you, is that do they have the weapons to execute a Jason Maas offense as it stands?
I think maybe this makes it more of a priority to make sure that they do, because they had a pretty good receiving core this year, but one thing I don't think they had an abundance of was explosiveness. Right. I look at the things that maybe they could do with Kyran Moore.
Yeah.
and maybe they can use him a little bit like Weston Dressler used to be used here.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite the comparison.
Yeah.
But you look at the athleticism and this diminutive receiver who you can it's almost like a joystick with Madden. Let's have some fun with this.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wonder what the potential is for Kyran Moore. He got 996 yards this year. He could become a 12, 13, 1,400-yard receiver with Jason Maas having some fun using someone of that talent. There were times when Kyran Moore, after a strong start, seemed to be de-emphasized in this offense.
Yeah.
They could absolutely go nuts with him. If Shaq Evans is back, that's huge.
And that's where I was going.
That makes it more of a priority.
Does he become a must sign, do you think?
I think he was anyway, Austin.
Mm-hmm.
1,300-yard receivers don't come along very often.
Yeah.
And you look at the rapport that he had with Cody Fajardo.
Mm-hmm. Again,
sometimes you just have to go with what you know. That didn't obviously turn out to be the case with Stephen McAdoo staying in Saskatchewan, but Shaq Evans had a lot to do with Cody Fajardo playing as well as he did, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they were. You're looking at receivers got 1,300 yards. You just make a point of trying to get him back, and maybe that's where the charisma and salesmanship and simple presence of Cody Fajardo is advantageous, because I'm sure he's going to be texting and calling and maybe cajoling. Yeah. And hey, let's be a part of this. Grey Cup's here in 2020. Let's put on a real show.
Oh man, and if they're a bomb squad, that could be a lot. Next season could be a lot of fun if it goes that way.
Yeah.
And who knows? There's still question marks. Obviously,
we don't know.
We don't know.
I mean,
your predictions every year show that.
You know what? I actually got Winnipeg right. The only team I got right in the West this year was Winnipeg. I picked them for third, and they finished third. Yeah. So I was so proud of myself for getting Winnipeg right. But then I got the result of each of their three. I had the wrong prediction for each of the Bombers' 3 playoff games. So I got them right for third place and then completely bombed on the Bombers in the playoffs.
That was a tough one to predict. Okay, we've talked Maas and that side. Let's talk the odd man out of this equation, Stephen McAdoo. And I know, as you said off the top, it's a little early to say who told who what. If he told the team he wouldn't be returning, or if the decision was made within the organization to replace him. We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
Do you think, knowing what we know currently, do you think Stephen McAdoo was the wicker man? Was he a human sacrifice for that poor West Division final showing from the Riders offense?
I think you can safely say it didn't help his cause. When it's interesting how you look at it, because if you look at the body of work under Stephen McAdoo this year, as alluded to earlier, I think that it's generally pretty good. They had a good year, not a spectacular year offensively, but certainly way better than it was the year before. Mm-hmm. And under that system, Cody Fajardo became a star.
Right.
But then once you get to the biggest game of the year and the offensive strategy is called into question, how much weight do you attach to the regular season compared to the big game where you struggled? I wondered if it was going to be one of those, hey, I did really well at dinner theater, mm-hmm. but then I appeared on Broadway and absolutely bombed, and they canceled the show after 2 days. Right. And it suddenly doesn't matter if you're starring at Stage West in Regina. So I wonder. There was once upon a time there was a Stage West. Whatever happened to dinner theater? But you're too young to remember this.
Another time.
But I just wonder if ultimately, and we don't know. Maybe we'll get some answers on this. But ultimately, more weight was attached to the West Final than everything leading up to it, and maybe the fact that the Rough Riders offense, albeit with an injured quarterback, could not cash in 3 times in the fourth quarter when they're at or inside the 5-yard line. And then on another occasion, they got to the 25 and settled for a field goal. I just wonder if that's what resonated. Mm-hmm. We don't know. Maybe prior to all that, Stephen McAdoo's intentions not to return were made clear to the Rough Riders. Right. Until we have a chance to ask questions and get some answers, there's a lot of conjecture here.
But the size of the stage matters, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like when the pressure is on, you have first place for the first time in 10 years?
Yeah, and second time in 43 seasons.
Second times in 43. That matters. And they didn't take advantage of home field advantage for the second time in a row. And I know that the situation was different in 2018 with Zach Collaros being injured, but there were a lot of similarities in those two disappointing performances.
Yeah, and there were some direct parallels. If you look at the 2008 West semifinal against Winnipeg, Brandon Bridge finally gets something going. They pull him out.
2018,
pardon me. Yeah. Brandon Bridge finally gets something going moves the ball nicely. Out comes Brandon Bridge. In comes David Watford. Running play telegraphed. Kaboom! End up with a field goal. So this time the offense it wasn't struggling to the extent that it was the year before, but they didn't reach the end zone.
No.
Cody Fajardo has a nice drive going, 4 straight completions. Out comes Cody Fajardo. In comes Brian Bennett. First play worked out fine. He got down to the 1.5 yard line. But then chaos reigns. Brian Bennett still in the game. Not necessarily a bad decision when you have an injured starting quarterback. And Brian Bennett's a good runner on short yardage situations.
Sure, but what was
and you've got William Powell behind.
But what was the play call?
They're in the shotgun and they collide and it's Keystone Cops.
Yeah, so, when you've got William Powell back there and you can't get the ball into his hands.
Exactly. And there were eerie similarities to what had happened the year before with arguably higher caliber personnel and certainly more at stake when you look at a Grey Cup berth. And then if you extend it a little further and you consider all the opportunities that weren't capitalized upon in that game, you lose a home playoff game. You still haven't won a home playoff game at the new stadium to a Winnipeg team that proceeds to just vivisect the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the Grey Cup. I didn't think Hamilton would be that vulnerable. But suddenly you start thinking with another week to look at it, what were the consequences of that offense not being able to cash in at those crucial junctures? You couldn't beat a Winnipeg team that then won the Grey Cup handily. So did that not just cost you the West Division final at home, which is a rarity in itself, but did that cost them a Grey Cup?
Yeah.
And that is still lingering.
And you're right. Like it, because all those what ifs like that, I think, Dickinson had said the day after, Coach Craig Dickinson had said he had a little bit harder time sleeping that night than he usually does. But usually he's able to kind of leave that behind after the Grey Cup. And I'm wondering if that Grey Cup result maybe twisted the dagger a bit more, because seeing what Winnipeg was able to do with the Tiger Cats, you might have just been one game away if you beat the Bombers. I mean, the Bombers had a great game plan to beat Hamilton, and Hamilton didn't put up that great of a fight. Certainly not to the level that we saw them do during the regular season.
No, and the Riders played Hamilton pretty tough during the regular season.
Yeah.
They lost the opener 23-17 the same night your Raptors won the NBA title.
Woo.
And they did that with using 3 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And then they beat Hamilton at Mosaic Stadium during the Queen City X. Granted, Hamilton did not have Brandon Banks that night.
Right.
But I think they still would have played pretty well against Hamilton. I think
Hamilton didn't have Brandon Banks for the whole Grey Cup game either.
or at least a considerable portion of the second half.
Yeah.
And so even when Hamilton did have Brandon Banks, Winnipeg was able to control him.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at, okay, if they'd gotten past Winnipeg here, maybe they just keep waltzing on through. And I remember talking to somebody after the West Final, and I said, well, maybe the Rough Riders just put off the misery for a week because Hamilton is such a powerful team. Maybe you win that, you go to the Grey Cup, and you get slaughtered anyway, or another Grey Cup defeat. There have been a few in Rider history. Yeah. But when you look at I think the opportunity
on the 10-year anniversary.
Yes. Oh, yes. Has
Sorry.
it been that long?
Yeah.
But I think the opportunity that was lost really hit home on Grey Cup Sunday, as much as it probably more than it did on November 17th.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And I meant to ask you about, we mentioned William Powell. Do we know his status? He's a free agent.
He's under contract.
Is he under contract?
Signed a 2-year
okay.
contract.
He's coming back. And it looks like he still has legs, obviously.
I would think so.
Although I might not say the same about Marcus Thigpen near the end.
Yeah.
Thiggy might be.
There weren't save for one kickoff return, there weren't the explosive plays that they were getting out of Marcus Thigpen the year before. They had the 2 long touchdown runs, for example, and another 34-yarder in 2018. They weren't getting the same knockout plays out of Marcus Thigpen that they did the year before. Yeah. Was that scheme, or is that Marcus Thigpen aging? He still had enough legs to go for 100 yards on a kickoff return. Yeah. But and he still made some plays, but it wasn't the same player who could just tear apart a defense. Yeah. And now he's 34 years old next season. And William Powell is 32. And that you look at the shelf life of running backs, and 32 is like 52. Yeah.
Although Jerome Messam was still doing that at 32, 33 too, and he was a grinder, a kind of pound the ball down your throat type runner. William
Powell, I think they should be able to extract another year out of him, and maybe that. Jason Maas doesn't seem to be a huge proponent of the run, but if the passing game can be even more effective, maybe that liberates the running game as well, because there were times when the Riders tried to establish a run with William Powell, and it was like they were just running into a wall.
Yeah.
Especially against Winnipeg. Winnipeg seemed to know when the run was coming, and no matter what they tried, it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
So maybe if the passing game is even more of a threat, maybe you pass to set up the run as opposed to the inverse.
Yeah. So I think we're winding down here. So
at my age, that is certainly true.
Well, you've been winding down for a while, but let's your optimism about this team today compared to yesterday, same, greater, less than?
I think it's about the same. I think bringing back Stephen McAdoo would have been a solid move. I had written that pretty much. That probably doomed it. but I think if you look at Cody Fajardo and another year with this team and what he's capable of doing, I think that is the magnet. As much as I think Jason Maas is a good hiring considering the circumstances, the magnet and the nucleus is still Cody Fajardo, and I think the Riders have only scratched the surface with him, not only as a quarterback, but I think as a presence. What kind of Cody mania is there going to be now that there's an entire offseason to build it? Mm-hmm. And what kind of what does that give? What kind of credibility does that give the Rough Riders in the free agent market? Mm-hmm. So irrespective of who the offensive coordinator is, I think they had a very good one. I think the results speak for themselves unless you really attach a lot of weight to the West Final, and that argument is sound. And I think Jason Maas comes in with there's some skepticism because judging by my inbox, it's not a universally popular move. The bottom line is whoever is the offensive coordinator they've got this gem to work with.
Yeah.
And now he's coming in for the first time in his career as an unquestioned starting quarterback, the guy. And it seems like he's born for that role. It's like he's been just waiting for it. And when that opportunity came about, he seized it. And what other things can he take advantage of? And what else can he bring to this franchise now that he's entrenched as the guy?
One thing Cody Fajardo could bring to us is being on the podcast.
You're invited, Cody.
Open invitation, Cody, that I would happily give up this chair that I'm sitting in.
And we have a lovely coffee mug for you. I'll even wash it before I give it to you.
And that's more than what you do with your clothes. So that's a big advantage. Cody,
I just walked
special
through a car
treatment.
wash.
Yeah, there we go. Is there anything else that we've missed on this, Rob?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
But we will we'll weigh in as events warrant during the off season, and hope you will join us as we follow this Rough Rider. There's never an off season for football.
No.
And I think the fact that we're sitting here in December doing this is evidence of that. Is there anything you'd like to say about?
No, Murray, we miss you. Hope you're doing well, and I think that's it. Thanks for letting me sit in your chair, Murray.
And we'll return with Murray McCormick or Austin Davis. And again, Cody Fajardo, you're invited if you'd like to occupy the chair. I have to read this or I'll be shot. The rules are rules. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email Rob, that's me, at rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show. You can follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Vanstone, in absentia, Murray McCormick at Murray LP, and Austin.
AMDYQR. Don't follow me on Twitter. Save yourself the hassle.
Watch the splainer.
Watch the
I want a splainer on this situation.
We just did it. You did it.
But we need your antics and hijinks and gyrations.
Gyrations.
For Mr. Splainer himself, Austin Davis, I'm Rob Vanstone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.